The isolation of the A-frame cabin had been the main appeal. Tucked deep within the state forest, accessible only by a miles-long dirt track, it offered the perfect escape for the solitary writer seeking absolute quiet. The man, a known skeptic of all things supernatural, settled in easily, enjoying the vast, unnerving silence that pressed in from the surrounding ancient pines. The first few days passed in a productive haze of writing, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the intermittent crackle of the fireplace. Yet as the week progressed, the silence began to feel less like peace and more like an expectant void. It started subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible dragging sound outside at night, easily dismissed as a branch pulled by the wind. Then, the distinct rhythmic thump against the back wall, always precisely at 3:17 a.m. He would jolt awake, flashlight in hand, but the woods would be still and dark, revealing nothing but his own breath misting in the cold air. The cabin had no curtains, and the large A-frame windows became dark mirrors reflecting the interior, blurring the line between inside and out. He began to feel perpetually observed. One morning, he found a small, meticulously stacked pile of river stones just outside the front door. They weren't naturally occurring. They had been deliberately gathered. He dismissed it, kicking them aside. But the next day, a similar pile appeared, closer to the cabin this time. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. The rational part of his mind suggested a curious animal or a stray hiker, but the nearest marked trail was over a day's hike away. The piles continued, growing larger, more elaborate, like strange, silent sculptures being built on the perimeter of his temporary home. The turning point arrived during a sudden, thick fog that rolled in, trapping the cabin in an ethereal white blindness. Inside, the air grew heavy, and the sounds of the woods vanished, replaced by a cotton-like rustling. He was standing by the sink when he saw it, a shadow moving in the dense fog right outside the window. It wasn't a quick flicker. It was a slow, heavy gait of something impossibly tall. He froze, his rational defenses crumbling. The figure stopped directly outside, its form a distorted smudge in the fog, yet he could feel the weight of its presence, immense and patient. Then a long, slender finger traced the line down the wet glass, slow and deliberate, leaving a smear that vanished almost instantly as the moisture rushed back in. He didn't scream. He couldn't. He simply backed away, grabbing his phone only to confirm he was miles beyond any signal. He sat huddled in the main room, the flashlight beam cutting a useless circle in the increasing gloom. The tapping began then, not on the wall, but on the roof, a gentle, consistent tap, 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 as if someone was walking barefoot on the wooden shingles above him. The sound moved in a circuit, tracing the outline of the cabin, getting louder with each pass, a deliberate violation of the space above his head. He knew whatever was out there hadn't been an animal or a hiker. It was something that understood boundaries and was testing them, slowly closing in. When the tapping finally stopped directly over the main beam, he heard a new sound, the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged across the wood floor, coming not from outside, but from the empty bedroom upstairs. He left the cabin moments later, running blindly into the fog, not caring about the trail, simply running from the horrific realization that the silence had been broken, and the thing that broke it was already inside. He didn't stop until he reached the highway, never looking back at the dark shadow swallowed by the pines.
The group of college students had chosen the isolated cabin for a weekend of drinking and telling ghost stories, leaning into the cliché with youthful enthusiasm. It was a derelict structure, a relic from the 1920s, perched precariously on a shallow ridge overlooking a small, dark ravine. The property was known locally for its forgotten water well, sealed decades ago after a rumored tragedy. They'd been warned about the well, not because it was dangerous, but because of the local legend attached to it. Whispers said it was a place of sorrow, and a permanent opening to something ancient and cold. On their first night, the party atmosphere began to thin out as the sheer isolation of the place started to sink in. Around the sputtering campfire, one of the students, a cynical engineering major named Mark, scoffed at the warnings and declared he would prove the legend was nonsense. The old well was situated about 30 yards from the cabin, a low stone circle covered by a heavy rusted metal plate secured with thick chains. Mark, using a crowbar found in the cabin's shed, and fueled by a foolish confidence, managed to pry the chains loose and slide the metal plate aside, revealing a shaft of impossibly black darkness. He shone his phone light down, but it was swallowed instantly. The only thing that came up was a rush of air, unexpectedly cold, and smelling faintly of wet earth and something metallic. They stood at the edge, a new, profound silence settling over the group, broken only by a chilling sound that seemed to rise from the depths, a faint, almost musical whistling, thin and high-pitched, like a breath drawn over a broken reed. It was not natural, and it was too deliberate to be the wind. They quickly secured the lid, the sheer dread of the unknown overriding Mark's bravado. But the whistling did not stop. It was now outside the cabin, moving slowly around the perimeter. The next morning the whistling had ceased, but the cabin itself felt different. The air inside was noticeably colder, and a perpetual draft seemed to whip through the rooms, even when the windows were sealed. They found small, cryptic etchings carved into the wooden window frames, not deep cuts, but superficial, almost panicked scratches that hadn't been there the day before. The etchings seemed to resemble crude, elongated figures, all pointing toward the well. That night, as they tried to sleep, the true horror began. It wasn't the whistling, but a new, more intimate sound, a whisper. It was a woman's voice, terribly close, sounding as if it were right next to the ear of the listener, yet utterly incomprehensible. It was a torrent of urgent, frantic sounds that lacked structure, a language of pure distress. Each person heard it differently. For one, it was a repeated sibilant command. For another, it was a heartbroken weeping. The most terrifying aspect was that it seemed to know their names, weaving their names into the gibberish, pulling the attention deeper and deeper into the nonsense. They tried to shout over it, to turn up music, but the whispers pierced the noise, inescapable and personal. The cabin felt like a drum, and the well thing was beating on the outside, trying to break through the thin layer of wood and paint. When one of the girls started laughing hysterically, staring blankly at the wall, repeating a single garbled phrase from the whispers, they knew they had to leave. They fled in the pre-dawn dark, leaving everything behind. As they sped down the gravel road, they looked back and swore they saw the rusty well cap slowly spinning under the pale moonlight, and in the distance, the high, thin sound of that initial whistle followed them, a mournful, triumphant farewell.
The cabin was a recent rental for a couple, Sarah and David, looking for a romantic, secluded getaway to rekindle their relationship. It was a modern log cabin, well-maintained, with a rustic but comfortable interior. The owner, an older man with distant eyes, had given them only one strange instruction: never move the rocking chair from the front porch. It belongs where it sits. They laughed it off, assuming it was a quirky homeowner's rule, a minor eccentricity of mountain life. The chair itself was a dark, heavy oak, worn smooth with age, and placed perfectly to overlook the dense tree line. They noticed early on that the chair was never quite still. Even on a windless day, it would gently rock once or twice before settling again. They convinced themselves it was a trick of the uneven floorboards, a slow, natural momentum. But the sight of the empty chair moving on its own, a subtle, rhythmic creak, stop, began to grate on their nerves. The first truly disturbing incident involved David's wallet. He left it on a side table inside the cabin. Later that evening, he found it resting squarely on the seat of the rocking chair outside. He was positive he hadn't gone outside since arriving. Sarah was equally adamant she hadn't touched it. The playful energy of their trip quickly dissolved into mutual suspicion and rising anxiety.
The air was charged with a tension that had nothing to do with their relationship and everything to do with the unseen presence they were sharing the space with. They tried to ignore it, but the phenomena escalated. Tools left in the shed would appear meticulously lined up beside the rocking chair. A ceramic mug left on the railing would be found upright on the chair seat, filled with perfectly clear rainwater, even if it hadn't rained that day. The chair was less a piece of furniture and more the focal point of a subtle territorial haunting. Finally, in a moment of exasperated defiance, David decided to break the strange rule. He grabbed the chair and dragged it inside, placing it firmly in the middle of the living room, declaring, "If you want to move it, you'll have to move it from inside." That night, they slept fitfully, the cabin silent save for their nervous breathing. In the deep hours before dawn, they were both awoken by a sound that made their blood run cold, the familiar heavy creak of the oak rocking chair, coming from the living room. It wasn't the gentle sway from the porch. This was a loud, heavy, weighted rocking, fast and frantic, as if an immensely heavy person was sitting in it and rocking violently. The rhythm was erratic, punctuated by sharp, wet sniffing sounds that seemed to emanate from the area of the chair. Sarah sobbed silently, clutching David as the rocking continued, relentless and furious. Then the rhythmic rocking suddenly stopped. There was a profound, suffocating silence. David had shined his flashlight into the room. The chair was still, pointed directly toward their bedroom door. But what was truly horrifying was what lay on the floor directly in front of it. A small, dark pile of matted animal hair, freshly shed and damp, forming a perfect, unsettling circle, as if someone or something had just stood up and left its place at the heart of their cabin. They didn't even pack. They simply opened the door, ran to the car in their pajamas, and sped down the mountain, knowing they had disrupted a terrible patient ritual and had narrowly escaped becoming the new occupants of the empty chair.